Good evening. I'm Jim Zirin, and this is The Digital Age. Tonight's show is about the creation and the evolution of the internet platform known as Facebook. Thanks to the hit movie, The Social Network, we needn't be reminded that Facebook was started by a 19-year-old geeky Harvard sophomore named Mark Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg transformed his vision, which started as a dormitory novelty, into an internet powerhouse. Facebook today has 500 million subscribers. So our question tonight is, how did Zuckerberg do it? And here to answer this question is someone who is in a position to know. He is David Kirkpatrick, who is the author of the best-selling book, The Facebook Effect, the inside story of the company that is connecting the world, which is a marvelous contribution to the public record of this interesting internet vehicle. David Kirkpatrick, welcome to The Digital Age.
Good to be here, Jim. Thanks.
Now, David, congratulations on your book. Would you tell us, you were a senior editor at Fortune magazine.
I was, yeah.
And you quit to write the book.
Well, that was a good reason. Because I thought that it was probably the most important company that I'd ever encountered in 20 years of writing about technology. And because I really had always wanted to write a book, and I thought this is one that would engage me for a long time. I'm easily bored, and I really wanted a topic that was going to stay important for a while, and I think it has. I started writing it when the company had 50 million users, and it came out right around the time it got 500 million, so I guess I picked a topic that was not going to get boring during that period.
So you started in 2007, and you
I started in early 08, yeah.
Early 08, and at that time it had 50 million users.
But when I first talked to Zuckerberg and said I wanted to write the book, it had 50 million, and he said go for it, which was great. And then I actually started writing it in August of 08, really writing it. By then it probably had more like 75 million.
Now, of course, everyone's talking about the movie The Social Network, which is filled with accounts of college students having sex and taking drugs and wanting to get into finals clubs. And it's based, the movie's based on the book The Accidental Billionaires by Ben Mesrick, which I know you read. It's in your bibliography. And Mesrick never interviewed Zuckerberg, did he?
No, but he tried, but he didn't succeed. I think the Facebook people felt that knowing the kind of books that he writes, it would not be a fair portrayal of what Facebook was about, and I think in the end they concluded they were right about that based on the book, and I think they feel that about the movie as well. I mean, there wasn't even attempted to be a really accurate story about what Facebook is. It was intended to be a very dramatic and gripping sort of sex-filled narrative, which it is, and the movie is the same.
Well, it kind of portrays Zuckerberg, at least in the movie, and I guess to some extent in the book, as some kind of internet robber baron.
Right.
Do you think that's fair?
Well, there's a view among a lot of people that only robber barons and ruthless people could be successful in business, and it's not fair because Zuckerberg actually is quite an interesting contrast to the average business success. He's an unusually high-minded person, and unusually ambitious in terms of social change, who happens to have done abuse. In fact, from the very beginning in my conversations with him, he's always talked about business is a good tool for getting things done. It's not like business is a good way to get rich, even though he is super rich and he will get richer, and he's perfectly happy to get rich.
He's the youngest billionaire in the world.
Well, he's I think he's the highest person of his age on the Forbes list, and maybe the only, well, he's worth about $8 billion now, depending on how you calculate it. That's a lot for 26. I don't know how he falls in. He changes so fast that it's hard to really keep track of his stature in the hierarchy, but he's very high up there for his age. But I don't think he did it for that. I really do think that that the movie gets it wrong when they try to portray him as a ruthless, you know, selfish, girl-obsessed, sort of jerk, really, which is not what he is. He had a girlfriend throughout the entire period that the movie pretends to describe. So a lot of the incidents in the movie are just plain wrong. There was no Erica Albright, who's the character in the opening scene of the movie. That was a completely invented character by Mesrick and Sorkin, and especially Sorkin.
Sorkin was the screenwriter.
Yeah, Aaron Sorkin wrote the screenplay.
He told this to New York Magazine. He said, quote, "I don't want my fidelity to be to the truth. I want it to be to storytelling.
Right.
What is the big deal about accuracy purely for accuracy's sake? And can we not have the true be the enemy of the good?"
That's a weird thing to say.
Isn't that a crock?
Well, I think it's a weird thing to say when you're talking about a movie about a living 26-year-old and using his real name. That's really outrageous if you think about it. If it was a movie made about you or me and the person used our real name and applied that sort of logic to the film, wouldn't we feel pretty bad about it? I know that at Facebook they feel it was a gross distortion, and I, as the closest thing the company has to a real historian, am absolutely convinced the movie is fundamentally inaccurate in many respects. But the complicated thing is that there are a lot of things in the movie that are true. A lot of things did happen. I always say it's maybe 40% accurate, which is a toxic fact, because it makes it very hard to disentangle truth from fiction.
Well, I think that one of the aspects of the movie, which I suppose makes it interesting to viewers, is there is an attack, is there not, on Zuckerberg's integrity. They say he defrauded the Winklevoss twins. They say he defrauded his good friend Savarine, who was the co-founder of the company.
Right.
They talk about other lawsuits. And it looks as if this guy kind of plays it fast and loose with everyone he's close to. Does that have any substance?
Well, there's a little bit of substance to that, and that's, again, one of these complicated things. I mean, there were lawsuits brought by both the Winklevosses and Divya Narendra, their partner, and by Eduardo Savarine, who was not really the co-founder of Facebook, but he was somebody who gave Mark a little money, and Mark brought in because he thought he had business smarts. And the movie tells roughly accurate trajectory of the relationships with those people.
Well, Savarine also helped finance him at the beginning, isn't that right?
Yeah, but it wasn't really for the money. It was really, Zuckerberg thought Savarine had business savvy, and he wanted somebody who understood business to help him. He actually had plenty of his own money. Zuckerberg had many tens of thousands of dollars in the bank because of his programming jobs in the summers. Savarine had more. Savarine had made quite a bit of money in the markets. He was very savvy about money. But he brought him in because he thought he would be a good business partner, and he proved not to be. And the movie actually shows that accurately, in that Savarine really tries to convince Zuckerberg to monetize the site, get ads all over the place really quickly. That did happen. Zuckerberg did disagree, as the movie describes. And one of the reasons that Savarine was pushed out was because he was urging Zuckerberg much too aggressively to plaster Facebook with ads, and Zuckerberg was convinced that would really turn off the users, and he was clearly right. Zuckerberg has always, then and now, been convinced that the primary issue for him is growth and getting Facebook to more people, more users. He feels that as strongly today as he did in the summer of 2004. But also, Savarine didn't really believe in Facebook, and the movie shows this accurately as well, that he refused to move out to Palo Alto. He insisted on staying in New York. They wanted him to come out. He wouldn't come. And to Zuckerberg and his partner, Dustin Moskovitz, and later Sean Parker, that was really a statement by Savarine that he really didn't believe, and why should he stay a 30% owner of the company if he wasn't even committed to doing it? And they dropped out of school, he didn't. But the real
and also he cut off his credit card. He wouldn't allow Zuckerberg access to
he closed off the bank
finance.
account.
Yeah.
That was a very big crisis in the company's young history. But the movie misleads in one very key respect in regard to Savarine, which is at the end you're led to believe that Savarine got totally frozen out and left with nothing.
And that Parker froze him out.
And Parker actually had nothing to do with the relationship with Savarine. It was all between Zuckerberg and Savarine. But the real thing is, Savarine is the true accidental billionaire, which is the title of Mesrick's book. Savarine worked part-time for 5 months or so. He's now worth close to $2 billion because he actually left with 7% of the company.
A greater interest, not
0.0001% as the movie would lead you to believe.
Greater interest than Parker got, isn't that right?
He does have more than Parker even today.
That's right.
But then with the Winklevosses and Narendra, it's also complicated. There was a partnership briefly where they hired Zuckerberg, never paid him anything. And he strung them along at a certain point. It appears in retrospect that Zuckerberg was uncomfortable helping them because he realized he could build something much better than they wanted to build. What he ended up building was not at all like the social network they wanted to build, much different, in fact.
And he didn't use their codes.
He didn't use any code. I don't think he really took anything from them of substance. And if he did take anything from them, it was only stuff that they took from MySpace and Friendster, which were already in existence at the time. So and I don't even think the movie really says that he stole the idea from them. That's what they assert, even to this day, and they're wrong about that.
Well, it could be argued they stole the idea from somebody else.
Well, they did.
Yeah, they did.
Any idea they had was actually, I talk in the book about Club Nexus at Stanford University, which had started 2 years earlier and had virtually all the features that Harvard Connection had, which was what the Winklevosses were trying to develop. So there's nothing new under the sun. You know, at the time that Facebook was invented, social networks were emerging at colleges all over the United States. They were emerging at Yale, at Stanford, at Columbia, at Baylor University, at a number of other places. And, you know, this is the thing with great ideas. They often are people arrive at them simultaneously, and it's execution that counts. Zuckerberg has been brilliant in the execution, which is really what my book is about, the incredible brilliance over the course of a sustained number of years that Zuckerberg has brought to making Facebook happen. And the true story, which I tell, is actually, I think, even more amazing in many respects than the made-up one in the movie.
And the Winklevosses walked away with stock in Facebook, which is today worth about $100 million, isn't that right?
Well, nobody knows exactly how much they have, but that's a good guess. I'd say it's in that ballpark, because they settled with Facebook almost 2 years ago, and the stock valuation of Facebook has, well, in 2 years ago, the valuation was probably, you know, well, it was, Microsoft tried to buy the company for $15 billion 2 years ago, or no, 3 years ago. But now it's at least doubled that, $30 billion. Some people are paying valuations for the stock at $40 billion right now. So, you know, I think the Winklevosses have at least doubled what they got at the time. You know, they came away with a lot of money for virtually no reason, in my opinion.
Well, it was really for keeping their mouths shut, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, there was a case they had that Zuckerberg mistreated them, you know, and that he didn't deliver what he promised. Of course, there was no written contract, no pay, but he did sort of screw them in the sense that, you know, he misled them, he sandbagged them, he didn't answer them honestly about certain things, and that, you know, I don't know if that's worth tens of millions of dollars in stock, but they got it, and you know, I mean, I think they had some kind of a case, or they wouldn't have settled. The case was not that he stole their idea and made Facebook out of it. That's just flat out wrong.
Okay, let's look at Zuckerberg. How many times did you interview him?
I don't know. I've interviewed him. I've spent time with him maybe 10 or 15 times. I've actually done formal interviews with him maybe eight times, maybe.
And Facebook seems to start and end with him. Is he a reclusive kind of guy, the way he's painted in the media?
He's not exactly reclusive. He's shy.
He's shy. I mean, Colbert at the recent rally in Washington said that Zuckerberg is someone who values his own privacy more than he values yours.
Yeah, that was a joke, though.
That's a joke. But is there anything to that?
There's probably a tiny bit to that. I think Zuckerberg tries to you know, live the way he wants his users to live, and there's been a little bit of a contradiction over time in that regard. There's no question. He's a geek. He would prefer to be at a computer coding than doing anything else. And he
says he's a hacker.
He is a hacker.
He runs hackathons.
He sort of thinks of himself that way, and really he cares about the product and engineering much more than he cares about the ads and the monetization and the organizational structure, but he's maturing very well into those other roles. So I think he's becoming much more comfortable as a public speaker, and he's out there a lot as a representative of the company. My own opinion is he needs to do that a lot more. He needs to work on getting better at it. I think he knows that. So, you know, he's not exactly reclusive, and he's not the kind of jerk that the movie portrays him to be, but, you know, he's somewhat self-absorbed. He's extremely confident to an amazing extent, which is one of the reasons he's been able to accomplish this. And he's actually not that interested in you if you don't say something interesting to him. He has a very high bar for, like, what engages him, and a lot of people find that a little bit obnoxious, I will say.
You've likened him to Bill Gates. You've said he's a visionary on the order of Bill Gates. You think that's right?
They came at it with a big, big vision of changing the world. Zuckerberg, you know, wanted to connect the world, and Gates wanted to put a computer on every desk and in every home. And both of those were quite radical at the time that they arrived at it. And they're also, I think, similar in that Zuckerberg is very rapidly now, at this very moment, getting into the position in the technology industry that Gates had for many years as the most fascinating, in a way, not richest, but he's rapidly going to become the richest, almost certainly. He won't maybe be the richest man in the world like Gates became, but, you know, that could happen too. And Facebook's role is quite analogous to Microsoft's in some ways. It's a platform for applications created by others. And they're also geeky guys that are not very social. I mean, there's a lot of similarities.
Yes, let's talk about the Facebook experience. You are on Facebook, you subscribe to Facebook, and you find friends. Now, supposedly, those friends are people whom you know, and you friend them.
Right.
Zuckerberg added a transitive verb to the lexicon to friend somebody.
Right.
And I haven't friended you yet, but I intend to.
Okay. Well, you'll see if I accept you.
But I've met you. Then the person who was approached about being a friend can accept or reject, as we all know.
Yep.
But it's clear that most people on Facebook have friended many people whom they don't know.
Right.
In fact, Facebook suggests to you that you approach various people who have mutual friends.
Yeah, that's a
and
good
that's
point.
how they expand their subscriber base. Now, the friend issue, in my view, is related to the privacy issue, which keeps coming back again and again and again. Zuckerberg is attacked because he's compromising people's privacy.
Right.
Now, the information that's on Facebook is information that the subscribers put on, right? So if they don't want people to know about it, they can engage in what Emily Gould calls internet abstinence. But they put it on, and it's for their friends, but their friends are people whom they don't know. So why is haven't they waived all their rights to privacy? Well, it's a long way of asking the question.
You've asked a lot of questions there, and in general, I really, really agree with your premise that this is one of the biggest problems that Facebook has, and it's somewhat self-inflicted by the users. I mean, Facebook was designed as a system that you use to connect to people you actually know in the real world. In general, it's still used for that, but it's also used for something much different by almost all of its users, which is to show you've got a lot of friends by kind of collecting them, by competing with your friends. For people in my generation, the baby boom, and a lot of people, it's sort of felt to be rude to say no to friend requests, so people tend to accept friend requests even from people they don't know, which is actually a problem because of the way Facebook is architected. So there's actually a contradiction, as you point out, between the fact that Facebook tells you, almost encourages you to make friends with people you barely know, and at the same time doesn't really give you tools to segment your friends into the kinds of groups that they actually fall into in real life. So if you look at it, you know, you have in your real life your family, your best friends, your work friends, your friends from the sex club, your friends from, the only friended on Facebook because you couldn't say no, you know, your friends from the bowling league, whatever. Everybody has got a bunch of different circles, some of which they're more public about than others. Okay?
Your high school sweetheart.
High school friends.
As you put it, if you're a retrosexual, you remember your
you like that word, retrosexual?
I love that word.
Retrosexual, quickly to define it, is people on Facebook who find their old high school or college boyfriend or girlfriend and reconnect, and often end up dumping their current relationship for that 30 years later. That's not uncommon. But so the point about this friend thing, though, is really real, and it's, I think, potentially Facebook's biggest Achilles heel. That they have to give us better tools to segment our interactions in the same way that our friend groups are actually segmented. So you want to be able to have a dialogue with your family that nobody else sees. And you want to be able to have a dialogue with your work friends that people who work for other companies don't see. And historically, that has been very difficult in Facebook. And they still don't have the best tools for that. They have recently added a new groups feature that allows you to basically have a sort of enhanced chat group with those kind of people in a way that is sort of ironclad, walled off from your other friends, and that's a step in the right direction. But they need to do a lot more to help people use Facebook the way they really use it, which is for far more than just the people they actually know in the real world. And I think if they don't solve that, usage will drop, because when you have way too many friends on Facebook, you can't really be that honest about your activities and what you say, because you know that that message is going to people that you don't really know. I talk a lot about all this stuff in the book, and you know, this issue of privacy is to some extent self-inflicted, as you say. I talk in the book about peer-to-peer privacy violations. You know, the famous photos of drunken college kids that cause them not to get jobs later in life. The reason those photos are up there, tagged with their name, is because their quote-unquote friend put it there. So they invited that by becoming friends with that person. The
friend might have used it against them anyway, even if there were no Facebook. I mean,
well, potentially, although
potentially you could email it to somebody. You could,
I mean, I doubt if it's as likely, but yes, that could have happened.
Yeah. I mean, one of the problems with the photo tags, of course, is that there's no opt-in. No one submits a photo to you for approval before they tag it on your wall.
Yeah, I really agree with that too.
You know,
yeah.
And but you can.
I mean, I agree with your critique.
You can opt out. But maybe it's there for 5 minutes or 5 days. It depends how often you log on.
Well, it doesn't even really matter how long it's there. As soon as you're tagged in a photo, that's distributed to a lot of your friends. So even though you can untag it, it's usually after the damage has been done that a lot of people have seen that photo of you. I've always felt, exactly as you described before, that the user ought to have the right to approve a tag before it is affixed on a photo, so that I should not be able to, you know, unwillingly be tagged on a photo. But Facebook has never been willing to give me that control, and it's something I strongly disagree with about their policies. And the reason they don't is because they're always trying to increase usage and page views, see? And if they did that, fewer photos would be tagged, and therefore fewer photos would be seen, and there would be fewer page views. And that's a sort of a tautology in the whole system, is that they claim they want to protect your privacy, but they also very much want usage and page views. And sometimes those things are in opposition.
Well, there's a trade-off, isn't there? Zuckerberg has said that his objective is greater openness and transparency in society.
Right.
That's what he's trying to accomplish. And it's almost a philosophical thing. And the trade-off to that is you give up something in privacy. It's much like the delicate balance between order and liberty. I mean, we have the police, they give us order, and we like to have liberty too, so that's there in the mix.
Right. Well, Zuckerberg's views are actually evolving fairly quickly at the moment. And in the book, I talk about how he says, you have one identity, meaning that, you know, your work self, your home self, your family self should be consistent and essentially the same, and that it shouldn't be that big of a problem, as I described before, if information leaks from one group to the other, because you should be an honest, consistent person. That's sort of his baseline view, and that's a very typical young person's view. I think as he becomes less of a young person, and also as he observes the way Facebook is used, I think he's somewhat backing away from that. And even the introduction of the new groups feature suggests that. But it is true that in general, Facebook tries to push us towards more disclosure and transparency. And I talk a lot in the book about the impact of that and the effects of that, and they are not all good at all.
Let's talk about the control of Facebook. One of the interesting things about Zuckerberg was when he was 20 years old, he was offered $20 million for this idea, which was in its fledgling state at that point. He turned it down. All the way along the line, he was offered increased amounts of money, including Yahoo that offered him $1 billion. He said the company is not for sale. Right. What was it about his vision that he could turn down these billion-dollar offers and retire for the rest of his life and stay with this thing, focusing on enhancing his subscriber base?
Well, the most impressive one, and it's a story that is told for the first time in my book, is that in the fall of '07, Microsoft offered to buy Facebook for $15 billion. At that time, Zuckerberg, who was 23, would have personally taken home at least $4 billion. And he turned it down, didn't even consider accepting it. And there's several reasons why. I mean, as I said before, he wants to take this thing to its ultimate extent. He wants to see how big it can grow. And he was very convinced that if any other company owned it, no matter how much money he took away, he would lose the control and the ability to make the decisions that he felt were justified and most suited to help this thing grow the biggest that it can. So I think that's number one. I also think in some pragmatic part of him, he realized that every offer he'd ever gotten was for more than the last, And he's actually told his friends that the day he gets an offer for Facebook that's lower than the one he got before, that's the day he'll sell. And I don't think that's happened yet. And it's currently trading, like I said, at a $30 billion valuation. So clearly he made a good decision to turn it down for 15.
Sure. He owns 24% of the company today, roughly?
That's the figure I have in the book, and that's never been revealed before. That's roughly the ballpark.
And Microsoft does have a junior participation, do they not?
Yeah, Microsoft now owns about 1.25%, something like that.
Right. But
they also have a very important deal with Facebook that's a big, big part of their strategy.
Yeah, but contractually, Zuckerberg has the final say on everything, isn't that right?
Well, that's an amazing thing about the Facebook story that actually makes the book such an interesting tale, is that this one guy has had absolute and total control throughout. So that Facebook really does reflect Mark Zuckerberg in a way almost no company ever has. He controls 3 out of the 5 board seats. Therefore, nothing can happen there that he doesn't want. And in a venture-funded company, that's highly unusual. In fact, it's unheard of. So that and that's because of Sean Parker, who helped him negotiate that in the very early stages. In the period the movie incorrectly kind of documents, Parker hated venture capitalists so much.
Because he had bad experiences at Napster and Plaxo.
And he figured out how to get Zuckerberg this control that he has to this day. That's a big deal.
Yeah, well, we have to wrap up.
Oh, that's too bad. We didn't even talk about politics,
which is one of my favorite. We didn't talk about politics or how Facebook is going to bring us world peace, which is something you speculated
well,
about.
I don't actually claim
that. But I wanted to thank you for coming by, David Kirkpatrick. You wrote a marvelous book. This has been a fabulous experience for our viewers and for me. And thank you for coming by. I have a question for you before we go, which is, what really makes Mark Zuckerberg run?
I think it's changing the world. He sees...
Changing the world. We're out of time.
Okay.
But thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more on the digital age. For the digital age, I'm Jim Zirin. Please visit our website at www.digitalage.org. For the digital age, I'm Jim Zirin. All the best.